Hello, thank you for visiting Echoes of Crime. Today, I want to tell you a case that seems like it only happens in horror movies, but is a real haunting. The last words echoed in the deafening silence. "I can't swallow any more water." The voice was weak, as if each breath was draining all the last energy. When the last sounds in the room fell silent, only the breathing of a 15-year-old girl was left. The next day, her body was discovered in such a state of emaciation that no one recognized her as a healthy athlete who was always full of life. The scene shocked the whole community. The bed was in disarray, the body was convulsed, the eyes were wide open but lifeless. In that moment of New Year's Eve, a whisper full of horror and mystery opened a case that made the whole of Venezuela wonder. Did death really come from a strange disease or from a dark curse? From the moment the girl collapsed with her last breath, everyone knew this was not a normal case. Narieli Cacharuco, a pretty, energetic 15-year-old girl who was the captain of her school's volleyball team, suddenly collapsed right after getting off the bus in La Guaira, the coastal city where she lived. It was blazing hot, and everyone thought it was just heat stroke. All the initial medical signs also contributed to allaying concerns. Normal temperature, stable blood pressure, almost normal blood sugar. But a few days later, her body began to deteriorate rapidly without any clear cause. At first, she was just tired, had insomnia, and felt nauseous. No one thought this was the beginning of a horrifying and painful journey. Doctors at the provincial hospital told the family that there was no reason to worry too much. Some tests were normal, no infection, and her heart and lungs were fine. They thought it could be due to exhaustion due to the weather and stress. But she refused to eat or drink, not even swallowing a drop of water. Her mother tried to gently put her on a drip, but she threw up immediately. In the following days, her weight dropped to an alarming level. Her body was as dry as a corpse. The family was desperate when they were sent home. No hospital would take her because they had no space or could not see the disease. Unable to find the cause, the local doctor advised her to go to a larger hospital in the capital, Caracas. But all doors were closed. The private hospital refused because there were no beds. The public hospital said there was no referral or convincing results. Meanwhile, she continued to get weaker. Her eyes could no longer focus. She could only communicate by winking. Once for yes, twice for no, and she even lost her voice. Just her lips moved weakly without making a sound. From a lively girl, she suddenly turned into a lifeless entity lying on the bed like a broken robot. The family was in turmoil, exhausted, wondering, was this an unknown medical condition, a strange neurological development, or a mysterious poisoning? Finally, in panic and desperation, they turned to shamans and spiritists, people who claimed to be able to communicate with the invisible world, using spiritual rituals to heal. And one of them was Narieli's close friend, Stefani, who had won the family's trust and affection for many months. Stefani appears as a savior. She comes from a region with a strong Santeria and Yoruba tradition, claiming to be able to connect with spirits and ward off evil spirits. In the eyes of Nari and her family, she is a trusted friend, helping with her studies, chatting with Nari every day, even to the point of spending the night at their house. When Nari begins to lose weight rapidly and become tired, Stefani increasingly acts as the only one who understands. She leads the family in a cleansing ritual under the full moon, giving Nari a red-black bracelet that she says has protective properties. At first, the mysterious ritual seems to calm Nari down a bit. Her seizures stop, her breathing becomes more even. But the initial improvement quickly disappears. The bracelet on her wrist worries her mother. One night, she secretly takes it off. Nari wakes up and sees it, but only smiles and doesn't ask any questions. Things continue to get worse. The family took her to the spiritual community that Stefani had introduced her to, an isolated mountain village. There, they performed a 3-stage ritual, dipping her in water 3 times, covering her with a towel and placing her body on ice overnight, then smearing her body with herbs and forcing her to drink a traditional medicine. Her mother remembers the moment she saw her daughter laid out on the ground. Her skin was pale, her eyes were wide open but lifeless, her body was cold. After the ritual, she seemed to calm down a little, but only for a moment. The sensitivity of her body to the strange ritual seemed to actually make her weaken faster. In their despair, the family seemed to no longer know what to believe. Medicine was hopeless. Spirituality was even more uncertain. After the ritual, Stefani suddenly disappeared just as Nari was at her worst. No response to messages, no visits, as if she had evaporated from their world. While the family fought to keep her alive, Stefani was no longer there. And then she returned after Nari's death, but now a completely different person. Quiet, withdrawn, offering no explanation. She later admitted that she had taken personal items from Nari: clothes, hairbrushes, scarves, even a bloody tissue, and used them in a dark ritual. An act that many called cannibalism in the symbolic sense, subjecting the victim's intimate body to a magical ritual. The family was horrified but still exhausted to resist. The police refused to prosecute because this act was not covered by criminal law. During the time she fought to her last breath, no one in Narieli's family knew that she was actually being pushed to the brink of death, not by illness, but by a shadowy spiritual connection. When she stopped breathing, relatives just looked at each other and wondered, was this a death due to a curse that had come true, or the result of a life-threatening psychological game? What really took her life? An undiscovered medical condition, dangerous superstition, or the lure of spiritual power? And was this death caused by the friend she trusted the most? There are more chilling details behind the case. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe for the next part. But the story is not over yet. There are many details left unanswered about the nature of the ritual, the origin of the bracelet, and why Stefani appeared and then left at the climax of the tragedy. Will everything be revealed in the next part? In the days after Narieli's death, her family's small house became suffocatingly cold. An air of mourning permeated every corner, but what was strange was not just the death, but the way everything had happened before, as if it had been planned long ago. Andrea, Nari's mother, couldn't stop thinking about the red and black bracelet her daughter had worn after the full moon ceremony on the beach. Her unease had not subsided even after cutting it off and hiding it. When she opened the drawer where the bracelet had been kept, she found it unusually decayed, even though it had only been a few days. The small black beads had fallen out, and the inside was hollow and covered with a fine ash-like dust, cold, dry, and disintegrating to the touch. Local, he shook his head after just one look, calling it a soul charm. An object used in a soul sacrifice ritual to create a bond between the person who gave the charm and the person who wore it. According to him, if the bracelet was not removed, it could keep the victim in a state of dependence, gradually wearing away. Unable to explain, she decided to bring the item to an old friend, a priest of strength, body, and spirit. Andrea was stunned. So that meant, if she had not removed the bracelet, would Nari still be alive? Or was that the reason why her daughter collapsed more quickly? But things did not stop there. After the simple funeral, the family began to clean up the things in Nari's room. In the study drawer, they discovered a small notebook, not a diary, not a lament, but strange lines of poetry. Each page was a short article written in Nari's handwriting, but the tone was strangely strange. Lines like, "I see him in the mirror every night, no one hears me scream, my voice is silent," or "Someone is eating what belongs to me." The last line was written in red ink, almost scratched on the paper. "I can't escape." The family did not know what to make of those words, but they knew clearly Nari had never been a superstitious girl and would never write anything like that. Panic began to take over. In the following nights, Nari's younger sister was constantly paralyzed, talking in her sleep, mumbling as if calling her sister's name. Every time she woke up, she cried, pointed to the corner of the wall, and said, Sister Nari is standing there, but she's not smiling anymore. At that time, no one thought about Stefani. She completely disappeared from town, her phone was turned off, her personal page disappeared. It was not until nearly half a month later that a classmate of Nari's received a text message from an unknown number. It was Stefani. The message contained only one line, "I didn't expect it to actually happen." Well, the friend took a screenshot and sent it to the family. Nari's parents immediately went to the police, this time bringing a video of the moonlight ritual, along with the testimonies of several other girls who had participated. One of them, Lena, a classmate, began to confess that Stefani had given her purification water that tasted metallic and burned her throat. After the ritual, she also experienced dizziness and diarrhea, but it passed quickly. Lena said that Stefani had whispered, "There must be a donor to save the rest." Nari's family no longer had any doubts. They believed that their daughter had been used as a sacrifice. When Stefani was summoned by the police, she was surprisingly calm. During her initial interrogation, she admitted that she had collected Nari's personal belongings: a comb with hair, a bloody tissue, a sweaty shirt from a soccer match, and used them in a binding ritual. But when asked why, she simply smiled and replied, "I just wanted her to be with me forever." The confession cut like a knife through Nari's parents' chests. But the irony was that in Venezuela, such rituals are not considered crimes. There was no evidence of poison, no sign of assault or coercion, no legal action could be taken against her. She left the police station as if nothing had happened. The townspeople were outraged. They held banners and gathered outside Stefani's house, which was now empty, but she was never seen again. One neighbor said she had seen a car with an unknown license plate pick her up at night. An old woman claimed that there were moans coming from her room that night, but no one could verify it. The story of Nari's death gradually spread like a legend. Some said she was under the influence of magic. Others said she was just depressed because of love. Others believed that Stefani's desire for power and control drove her to do the unforgivable. But the biggest question remained: how could a healthy teenage girl collapse in less than 3 weeks with all tests normal? Was it not the thing that killed her that came from outside, but from within the whispers, from the fear that could not be named? There was one more thing that made everyone's blood boil. A week after the funeral, the local priest received an anonymous letter left on the church bench. No name, no sender. Inside was a handwritten note in familiar handwriting. "If you don't take the bracelet off, I'll still be here. But I don't want to be kept like this, thanks." The once peaceful little town was shrouded in darkness. Although the incident with Nari had died down in the newspapers, the rumors were spreading. People began to avoid mentioning Stefani's name, as if the very mention of it would summon something not of this world. The story took a new turn early the following month. A man living in Caracas, more than 300 kilometers away, went to the police. He was a landlord and said he had found strange items in the rented room of a young woman named Stefani, who had left a few days earlier without notice. When the police arrived to inspect it, they couldn't believe their eyes. The room was small, nothing suspicious on the outside. But inside, they found a miniature altar set up against the wall. On it were half-burnt red candles, a wax effigy, a rusty dagger, and a large sealed glass jar containing a dark liquid and what looked like human hair. Preliminary tests revealed the hair matched Nari's DNA. But what really shook the police was something wrapped in paper, hidden under the bed. It was a small bag of charred bone fragments, accompanied by a scrawled note: "Once swallowed, they belong to me forever." Well, the question now was not, was there a ritual, but who ate it? The forensic results showed that the charred bones did not belong to just one person. There were at least 2 different human DNA samples. One of them was a female whose identity was unknown. The other was a male under the age of 25. The news of human bones burned and used in ritual immediately shocked the nation. The media called it a bloody spiritual case. and human rights organizations called for a deeper investigation, citing the possibility of forced ingestion of objects derived from human remains, a barbaric act. The police reviewed a list of people who had recently come into contact with Stefani. One name that stands out is Louis, her ex-boyfriend, who was hospitalized for a mysterious stomach infection. His story is like a missing piece. Louis recounted that at a meeting late last year, Stefani gave him a mind detox tea, forcing him to drink it during a full moon. He only took a sip and then threw up because the taste was so terrible, like rotten meat mixed with metal. After that, he began to be haunted by nightmares, stomach aches, and paranoia to the point of being temporarily hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. Louis was not the only one. A female classmate who was close to Stefani also said that, at a gathering, she was invited to a type of homemade cake. A few days later, she began to suffer from digestive disorders that lasted for 2 weeks. At the time, it seemed like food poisoning, but looking back, everyone shudders. Police tracked down a mysterious Chinese medicine shop where Stefani had purchased ash powder, essential oils, and strange ingredients. The shop owner, an older woman, said the girl always came at night and always asking about sacrificial bone powder, something the shop owner only knew from the legends of South American witch doctors. She said something that made everyone quiet. She is not practicing spirituality. She is playing with things that even people in the profession like me dare not touch. But there is still no clear evidence to charge Stefani with a crime. All are signs, suspicions, and a series of difficult-to-explain phenomena. No one knows where she is, but there are rumors that she has left Venezuela, or worse, is hiding in a heretical community specializing in witchcraft and sacrifice in the eastern forests. Nari's family now lives in a pain that cannot be healed, but what makes them unable to forget is the feeling of guilt. Her mother, Andrea, often stands on the porch every night, looking at the yard where her daughter used to play, whispering, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." As for Nari's room, no one dared to enter it. The younger sister said that every night she heard footsteps around the bed, a knock on the door 3 times, and a hoarse whisper, "You're still here." This story is more than just an unnatural death. It is a warning about the seemingly harmless games that young people sometimes fall into, about how blind faith can become a tool to control others, and about the dangers of rituals transformed into weapons. But the mystery was not over, because a few months later, a strange letter was sent to Nari's family, no postmark, no address. Inside was a piece of hair wrapped in red thread and a handwritten note, "I have found a replacement. Don't worry, Nari has a friend now." The Nari family seemed to have entered a stage of accepting the painful truth. Their daughter was no longer there. But the strange letter that arrived mysteriously, no address, no sender, no postmark, tore apart the fragile piece that remained. The hair inside was wrapped in red thread, just like the offerings in ancient South American spirit-calling rituals. The handwritten scrawls were chilling. "I've found a replacement. Don't worry, Nari has a friend now." The police were immediately called in, but the investigation yielded no results. There was no clear trace of DNA from the letter, no camera footage of who left it. The case had hit a dead end once again. But then a new person appeared and brought with her a story that turned everything upside down. The woman, Marisla, had been part of a secret cult operating in the Cora forest in eastern Venezuela, where ancient shamanistic tribes are believed to still exist in the shadows. Marisla said she knew Stefani, not by that name, but as La Roja, a nickname in the community that means the Red One. She wasn't your average spiritualist. She was an invocation, someone who sacrifices spirits in exchange for power. According to Marisla, Stefani once bragged to the group that she had successfully trapped a girl's soul into a loop. She believed that if someone ate a part of the soul-bound person's body, even if it was just bone fragments, hair, or burned skin, That person would become the place where that person's soul would be trapped forever, unable to escape. She said it like it was a victory, Marisla recounted, shuddering. She laughed like she had locked someone in someone else's chest, and then said, "Now it will never get out." Hearing this, everyone shivered. If what Marisla said was true, then Nari's death might not have been the end. Her soul might still be trapped in someone else's body, maybe someone else who had been forced to eat the ashes, or a ritual that was still going on. But things got even more horrifying when a new incident occurred in another town far from where Nari had lived. A 19-year-old girl, Carmen Lazo, was found in her rented room with similar symptoms. A bloated stomach, dark skin, paranoia, cries of pain, and finally died after 4 days of unknown causes. An autopsy revealed traces of ash and animal fat mixed with human hair in her stomach. But the strange thing was, Carmen had never been in contact with Nari, nor did she live nearby. But there was one thing in common. She had been friends online with someone named Stefani. That account was deleted the day after Carmen died. Now, investigators began to review everything. There was no doubt this was a series of incidents related to a rotating sacrifice model. Someone or a group of people is secretly spreading disaster by making victims accidentally eat parts of the dead, then tying the victim's soul to the next person's body. A ghost loop. From here, the most terrifying question becomes clear. If Nari's soul has been tied, then who is carrying her inside? A month later, information leaked from a psychiatric center in Colombia. A newly admitted female patient named Alondra, 21 years old with no history of mental illness, suddenly lost control. She cried in the middle of the night, banged her head against the wall, and kept screaming, "Get me out of here, take me home, please, moms." Doctors recorded her words. But after analyzing her voice, something unbelievable happened. The sound of that scream exactly matched Nari's voice, according to the videos the family had kept. People began to believe that Nari's soul had been forced into Alondra, a person who had never known her, but who might have unwittingly become the vessel in the new ritual. Now the truth was no longer in the hands of the police or the doctors. It was in the hands of those who were performing the ritual. Stefani, or rather La Roja, was no longer a suspect. She was the mastermind behind a string of bloody spiritual crimes, a controller of a network of living sacrifices that could have been a victim to anyone. So the final question was, if a soul could be trapped in another person's body, could you be sure that the soul in your body was really yours? In the darkness of bloody rituals and ghost cycles, the name La Roja, who once took the guise of a lovely-looking girl named Stefani, now emerged as a symbol of modern voodoo. A nightmare cloaked in superstition and perhaps more. The search for Stefani is no longer the responsibility of the local police or the victims' families alone. A team of paranormal researchers led by Dr. Nicholas Duarte, an expert in South American rituals and spiritism, has been involved. Initial clues lead them to the state of Barinas, Venezuela, which has been noted as an area in which clans of Bruja, blood witches, have been active since the 19th century. Dr. Duarte discovered that in many ancient records, there is a reference to a woman named Roja de las Almas, roughly translated, the Red One of the Souls. Legend has it that she has the ability to trap the souls of the dead in the ashes and transfer them to others, creating a living container. Each new soul makes Roja more powerful, as if she is collecting the pain, anger, and energy of the dead. Based on the cycle of deaths from Nari to Carmen to Alondra, investigators deduced that each time a person died, their soul was not released but forced into the body of the next victim through the ritual of eating the ashes. This made the soul-bound person unable to live long, their soul tormented inside a body that did not belong to them. And then they died, leaving that soul to be imprisoned again in the next person. An immortal cycle of pain. A chain of spiritual chains that never broke. So who is Stefani, or La Roja? Who is she? The key clue was found in an old medical record in Bolivia, belonging to a girl named Stefani Lucia Roja, who had been missing since 2008. According to the record, Stefani was a child born in a secret hermitage of the Warao shaman clan, but was reported dead due to spirit possession. That is, according to ancient rituals, she was forced to possess the soul of an ancestral spirit to protect the bloodline. But instead of becoming a protector, she grew up with two souls in one body, and one of the two was an evil spirit with its own consciousness, fierce and cruel. Many theories suggest that, since her fake death in 2008, that evil spirit has continued to possess other bodies to survive. And the Stefani we know today may not be the original body, but the newly possessed one. Each time a container weakens, La Roja finds a new victim, usually by befriending, inviting to participate in spiritual relaxation rituals and transfers herself. In other words, she doesn't die because she doesn't really live. Police later accessed a laptop that once belonged to a rare survivor named Sophie, who had almost participated in Stefani's ritual but fled at the last minute. On the hard drive, there was a deleted but recovered recording. "If you eat this, your soul will never be alone. It will have friends forever. You will never be empty again. You will be home for it." That statement alone confirmed the entire ritual. It was not an exorcism, not a cure. It was creating a home for the wandering soul. So is there a way to break this terrible cycle, Dr. Duarte believes that there is only one way: to return the entire chain of souls to the original person who was forced to contain the evil spirit, the original host. If the original host dies or is cremated in a ritual to break the bond, the entire chain of souls will be released. But the problem is no one knows who the original host is. And worse, if La Roja has jumped from body to body so many times, then the person who currently carries her could be living a perfectly normal life among us. A teacher, a student, a close friend, or even a psychiatrist. Most recently, a psychiatrist in Chile, famous for his metaphysical treatments, mysteriously disappeared after being accused of giving his patients tea with human ashes in it. But he disappeared before he could be arrested. And in his personal library they found a sketch of Nari's face with a strange caption at her feet. "She's still crying inside, but don't worry, someone will listen." So the final question is no longer who killed Nari or who is La Roja. The real question is, how many souls like Nari are being held captive around the world in completely innocent bodies? And what about you? Are you sure the soul in your body is really yours? Hello, thank you for visiting Echoes of Crime. Today, I want to tell you a story, a case that seems like it only happens in horror movies, but is a real haunting. He didn't stop. That was the last breathless moment Drew's boyfriend heard on the phone before the call went dead. The scene the next day shocked the community. The car door was still open, the red shoes were scattered under the cold light of the parking lot, and the handbag he had just bought was still there. A small but incriminating presence that this was no ordinary robbery. In just a moment, everything changed. Behind the normal appearance of an active student, a cruel truth was slowly revealed. The story begins here, but it doesn't end there. Drew S. Jodin left the store where she worked, a brand new, pretty bag containing a gift for her mother. She was still chatting happily with her boyfriend on the phone when she walked out into the parking lot of Columbia Mall, Grand Forks, on a cold November afternoon in 2003. Her voice rang out over the line, "That was great, you'll love me it," before only the cold wind and the tapping of the phone keys could be heard. That last scene echoed with deep anxiety before everything went suddenly silent. As soon as she realized the call had been cut off, her boyfriend called back, then contacted her roommate and relatives. When the police arrived, Drew's car was still open, her handbag and wallet intact. Everything in the car seemed to bear the marks of someone busy, not a target for ransacking. But the red shoes under the car and the sheath of a folding knife spread out on the tire were the first signs that something bad was about to happen. From that moment, time seemed to rewind tragically. They knew she had made 2 calls, the first inside the mall, the second a few hours later. There was no sign of force, no sign of a robbery. She had been abducted as she walked toward her car, a shadow that gently disappeared into thin air. The police began to process each clue. The mall's security camera had recorded her in a pink shirt, bright, long skirts, the familiar gait of a student like any other girl, diligently studying and volunteering. They also clearly saw a man wandering between the stalls, going back and forth for no apparent reason. Combined with the knife sheath found at the scene, they determined that this was no accident. Drew had been forced at knife point. The investigation plunged into a fierce investigation track. Boyfriends and ex-lovers were ruled out. Other suspects had no clear alibi. When police discovered one of Drew's shoes under a bridge near Crookston, Minnesota, about 25 miles from Grand Forks, they knew the case had crossed state lines. The FBI was called in at every hour, along with thousands of citizens volunteering to turn over every rock, every tree in the bitter winter cold. Over the course of several days, the authorities collected about 2,000 leads only to close them, painfully, one by one when the evidence was insufficient to convict. The harsh weather further hindered search efforts. Icy roads, heavy snow, and every area a minefield of difficult navigation. But public opinion was unshaken. More than 1,300 volunteers responded to the police call for assistance, as if they were running to save a missing child. Finally, a new lead emerged. A caller reported seeing Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a suspect with multiple convictions for sexual assault, in the mall at the exact time Drew went missing. Of the suspects examined, only Rodriguez was classified as a level 3 offender after being released from parole not long ago, and fit the description of unusual behavior in the surveillance video. A man sitting quietly watching, then quickly moving back toward the exit. When the police interrogated him, Rodriguez could not prove that he had bought clothes or seen a movie, although he said he had bought some and seen a movie that was not scheduled for the theater at the time. A search of his car left them stunned. Several different knives, and one with a sheath that matched the one found at the scene. DNA tests later confirmed that Drew's DNA was in his car. By early December, Alfonso was arrested, and Drew was still missing, with no one knowing where she was or if she was still alive. The case took a nightmarish turn. The suspect was arrested, but Drew's absence was still a big question mark. Behind the guilty or not guilty facade was an unprecedented tension. Would Drew return? And if not, what hope did the family have? Here we pause. There was one detail that was left unsaid. The autopsy revealed how Drew died and what clues confirmed that she could not have survived. And here the question remains. While the law pursued justice, how did Drew's community and family endure until the truth was finally revealed? When Alfonso Rodriguez was arrested on December 1, 2003, the entire Grand Forks community seemed to breathe a sigh of relief for a few seconds. Because soon after, a sense of anxiety, fear, and helplessness set in. They had a suspect, yes, but Drew was still nowhere to be found. And worse, Alfonso didn't say a word, didn't talk, didn't admit it, didn't lead the police anywhere. The quiet, painful question began to spread through the young girl's family. And if he hadn't talked, would she still be alive? Despite Drew's DNA in Alfonso's car, no one knew what had happened to her since the phone call abruptly ended that day. The harsh weather continued to paralyze the search. The snow was getting thicker, the sub-zero temperatures were freezing the ground like steel. But no one gave up. Volunteers continued to go into the woods to the river to climb over icy slopes, hoping to find a trace, a piece of clothing, a personal item, or simply something to let them know she was still out there somewhere. The police used sniffer dogs, helicopters, ATVs, and dozens of other specialized vehicles. But all were silent. Even her phone, which had been giving off a weak signal near Fisher, Minnesota, had gone completely silent since the night she disappeared. No texts, no calls, no GPS available. It seemed Drew had melted into the snow. The Drew family, exhausted but determined, decided to hire a private investigator, Bob Heels, a veteran of high-profile missing persons cases. He camped out with the investigation team, combing through everything from camera footage to the suspect's medical history. But everything hit a wall. Alfonso refused to say a word. No one expected that it would take nearly 5 months after the disappearance for them to get an answer. On April 17, 2004, in a desolate area near Crookston, just a few miles from where the first shoe was found, Drew's body was discovered in a deep, wet ditch. She was buried in snow, barely intact after months of exposure to the harsh climate. Her lower body was naked. Her hands were tied behind her back with rope. Around her neck was a nylon bag tied as a torture device. The emaciated body had multiple lacerations, including a deep gash more than 5 inches long in the neck. The victim had been tortured, strangled, molested, then left in the deadly cold to breathe her last breath in despair. The exact cause of death could not be determined because of the amount of time that had passed, but the autopsy report concluded Drew may have died from blood loss, suffocation, or simply left in the snow until her body gave up fighting. The television news that night paralyzed the entire state of North Dakota. Father Alan S. Jodin, through tears, said only one sentence: "At least now we can bring her home. If you've made it this far, don't take your eyes off the story." Behind Drew's death was a historic trial, gruesome confessions, and a shocking verdict in America. Subscribe if you want to see the next part, because what's coming is even more horrifying. The trial of Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. began nearly 3 years later in August 2006. Because he kidnapped the victim in North Dakota but killed her in Minnesota, the case was tried as a federal case, and for the first time in more than a century, North Dakota pursued the death penalty. In court, psychiatrists were called in to determine Alfonso's mental state when he committed the crime. But despite his history of mental illness, the panel concluded he was fully aware of his actions and legally competent to stand trial and receive the death penalty. The trial lasted for weeks, during which the prosecutor presented irrefutable evidence: a knife that matched the sheath found at the scene, Drew's blood in Alfonso's car, and especially traces from the nylon bag, rope, and torn clothes, all bearing the DNA of both men. Added to that was Rodriguez's presence at the mall at the right time, his stalking of the victim, and his history of violent crimes. In the end, Rodriguez was sentenced to death. The entire courtroom was silent, except for the muffled sobs of the victim's family. But the story doesn't end there, because more than 10 years later, in 2021, an unexpected event occurred. Alfonso Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned. Based on procedural errors and evidence that the defense attorney argued was not properly considered, the Federal Court of Appeals declared that the sentence may have been unfair and decided to overturn the death sentence. And guess what? Alfonso is back in court this time, no longer facing the death penalty. At this point, a big question rang in everyone's mind. If a man who kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered a young girl can still escape the death penalty, what meaning does justice have? The story seemed to have ended with the death sentence for Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a convicted sexual predator who had been convicted multiple times, finally paying the price for the most heinous act of his life. But no one expected that, nearly 18 years later, justice would be challenged again. In 2021, as the nation debates the death penalty and human rights in the justice system, a seemingly irreversible conviction has been overturned. That's right. A federal judge ruled that Rodriguez had not received a fair trial, that his defense team in the 2006 trial was seriously incompetent, and that evidence regarding the defendant's mental health was not adequately explored. And in just one morning, the Drew family, who had endured the pain of losing their son for nearly 2 decades, was thrown into a deep pit of despair. They couldn't believe it. The man who raped, tortured, and murdered Drew Estjadin was no longer facing the death penalty. The question immediately arose everywhere. Did the legal system fail to protect the victim? Could it be that even with DNA, testimony, a crime scene, and dozens of clear evidence, the perpetrator could still use legal techniques to prolong his life? Rodriguez's new attorneys filed hundreds of pages of appeals documents, including reports from new psychiatrists who said Alfonso was suffering from severe dissociative disorder at the time of the crime. He said that when he saw Drew, he thought he was seeing the image of the girl who had abused him as a child at a church camp. The panic caused him to temporarily lose control, and then he had no recollection of anything. But no one forgot what he himself confessed in his appeals. In it, Alfonso described his entire crime in detail. He admitted to approaching Drew's car while she was on the phone, opening the passenger door and threatening her with a knife. When she started bleeding from her mouth, he covered her face with a plastic bag, then tied her hands, stuffed her in the car, and raped her while she was still alive. He wrote that when he came to, he panicked, dumped her body in a ditch, and drove away as if nothing had happened. These words did not come from the indictment but were his own words, asking to avoid the death penalty. And then he got his way. The death sentence was overturned. The court decided to send the case back to trial to decide the punishment instead of executing her. The people of Grand Forks were stunned. They could not understand. A killer who had described exactly how he tortured his victim, had left a trail of blood, had been convicted multiple times before and still escaped the death penalty. Drew's father, Alan Estjadin, could not hide his disappointment. He shared that he often listened to the recording of his daughter's last phone call. Every time he listened, he imagined his little girl struggling, fighting, trying to call for help. But then everything fell silent. What could be more painful than knowing that your daughter was calling for help and you were helpless? He said through tears. And that was not just the feeling of a father, it was the pain of an entire community. Drew was not just a victim. She was a symbol of kindness, of optimism, of the young generation living for others. Before she was kidnapped, she volunteered to teach reading to kindergartners, donated to charities, and never refused to help anyone. Everyone loved Drew, and perhaps that is why her death caused such heartache for everyone. The case raises a deeper question than any court verdict. Can we accept a justice system where the perpetrators live while the victims do not? This is no longer Drew's story. It is our story, and painfully it is not over yet. Rodriguez continues to appeal, continues to delay a new sentence, and to this day has never formally admitted his guilt in court. He hides behind letters, doctors, and a complex legal system that seems to play hide-and-seek with justice. At the end of this section, we look back. The case has dragged on for nearly 20 years. A young girl was brutally murdered. The killer was caught but still alive. The victim's family is still waiting, not for revenge, but to see true justice served. Drew Estjadin is gone, but surprisingly, her death is not the end of the story. Instead, it ushered in a sea of change in the way America treated sex offenders. From a tragic case, citizens, lawmakers, and the government came together to create a new legal system, named after her, Drew's Law. At the time of the case, the sex offender system in the United States was lax and inconsistent. Each state had its own system, and finding information about people convicted of rape, molestation, or sexual abuse was difficult, if not impossible. Senator Byron Dorgan of North Dakota, where Drew was kidnapped, told Congress, "If we can track a FedEx package, there's no reason we can't track a child rapist." That statement struck a chord with millions of Americans. Because Alfonso Rodriguez, after serving a prison term with a long history of sex crimes, was released without adequate supervision and without warning to the community. So in 2006, with bipartisan support, President George W. Bush signed into law the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. Section H of the Act was the Drew S. Jodin National Sex Offender Public Website, a nationwide database that allowed citizens to check and track down registered sex offenders. It was called, in a short and meaningful way, Drew's Law. No one wanted their daughter to become a symbol of an anti-crime movement. But the S. Jodin family made a choice. They would not let Drew's death be in vain. They founded the S. Jodin Foundation, which focuses on educating young women, developing self-defense tools, funding emergency alert systems for colleges, and even holding personal safety seminars for students across the country. "We will never be victims again," one of Drew's close friends said at a seminar. "We will be a voice. Drew was a part of us, and we will not let her be forgotten." Every November, the month Drew was kidnapped, the University of Minnesota Crookston holds a memorial service with hundreds of people attending, not just to grieve, but to commit to action. But behind all the laws, organizations, campaigns, is a family that is still living in the loss. Drew's mother, Linda Walker, once said in an interview, "There are days when I feel like Drew is just going away to school. But then I look at her necklace and I know she's never coming back." Both Drew's parents took action. They testified in Congress, spoke at conferences, and fought tirelessly to ensure that people like Alfonso Rodriguez would never have another chance to hide in the shadows. Ironically, the legislation prompted by Drew's death led to Rodriguez's quicker recapture. But in the end, it was the system that he clung to avoid the death penalty. Drew S. Jodin was not the first victim, nor was she the only one. But what makes her special is that she became a symbol of change. Her death forced the entire country to look at how they protect their children. This case clearly shows two sides of justice. On one side is the determination to punish the wicked and protect society. On the other side is the legal principle. No matter how bad the crime, the accused still has the right to a defense, to a retrial if the process is flawed. We may disagree, but justice is not revenge. It is the truth, the process, the standards, even if sometimes it breaks our hearts. Every time someone visits the National Sex Offender Warning website, every time a woman becomes more aware of her surroundings, every time a new law is passed to protect victims, Drew S. Jodin lives on. Not in grief, but in action, Drew is not just a victim. She is the reason America no longer closes its eyes to the darkness.